March 17, 1945, 10 miles south of Wesel, Germany. Sergeant Victor Dowd crouched behind the sonic half-track as an 88mm shell screamed overhead, impacting 200 yards behind his position. The explosion sent mud cascading across the inflatable Sherman tank positioned 20 feet to his left, a tank that weighed exactly 93 pounds and would collapse like a punctured balloon if shrapnel found it. Dowd's hands worked the controls anyway, adjusting the massive speakers mounted on the vehicle's rear deck. Through the darkness, the recorded sounds of an entire armored division rolled across no man's land toward German positions. The grinding of tank tracks, the shouts of sergeants directing traffic, the metallic clang of equipment being unloaded. "They're buying it," Dowd thought, watching another artillery salvo impact the fake tank park behind him. "They actually think we're 30,000 men." They weren't. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, unofficially known as the Ghost Army, numbered exactly 1,100 soldiers. But for the next 6 days, those 1,100 men would impersonate 2 full infantry divisions preparing to cross the Rhine River, drawing German defenders away from the actual crossing point 10 miles north. The deception required every tool in their arsenal, more than 600 inflatable vehicles, spoof radio networks broadcasting fake orders, and sonic trucks like Dowd's that projected battlefield sounds 15 miles into enemy territory. What made this moment particularly absurd was that Dowd, like most of his unit, wasn't a combat soldier. Before the war, he'd been studying art at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. The man operating the radio truck 50 yards away had designed window displays for Macy's. The corporal painting camouflage netting over an inflatable artillery piece would become Bill Blass, one of America's most famous fashion designers. Their heaviest weapon was a .5 caliber machine gun mounted on their jeeps for self-defense. Yet in 72 hours, when the 9th Army's actual crossing began, German units would still be positioned here, opposite the Ghost Army's rubber tanks and recorded sound effects, while real American divisions poured across the Rhine virtually unopposed. Operation Viersen would become the Ghost Army's greatest success, their final performance in a traveling show of deception that had fooled the Wehrmacht across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany for 11 months. The Germans never discovered the truth, but there it was, proof that changed everything. A deception so audacious it redefined the meaning of battlefield strategy. If you want to see how this incredible operation rewrote the rules of engagement, support us with a like. It helps us uncover more buried stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to what those captured documents revealed. When the war ended 6 weeks later, captured documents revealed that German intelligence had tracked the Ghost Army's phantom divisions with meticulous precision, repositioning entire panzer units to counter threats that existed only as pressurized air and pre-recorded noise. But tonight, with shells exploding around inflatable equipment and loudspeakers broadcasting the sounds of a massive army that wasn't there, Dowd had only one thought as he cranked up the volume on the fake tank convoy: don't let them figure it out. The irony was exquisite. Germany had built the most technically advanced military machine in history. Panzer divisions with Tiger tanks weighing 70 tons, V-2 rockets, jet aircraft, sophisticated radar systems. Yet here they were, being systematically deceived by American college students wielding rubber balloons and a sound system. January 20th, 1944, Camp Forest, Tennessee. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops officially activated under the command of Colonel Harry L. Reeder. The unit represented something unprecedented in American military history, a self-contained mobile deception force capable of simulating 2 entire divisions, approximately 30,000 men, using nothing but creativity, technology, and calculated risk. The idea originated with 2 U.S. Army planners working in London during 1943, Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, a celebrity journalist who had managed the New Yorker magazine before the war. Ingersoll brought an advertising man's understanding of persuasion and illusion. Harris provided the tactical expertise and military credibility. Together, they studied British deception operations in North Africa, particularly Operation Bertram before the Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, where dummy tanks and elaborate camouflage had convinced Field Marshal Erwin Rommel that the British Eighth Army would attack from the south rather than the north. But the British efforts had been improvised, temporary affairs organized for specific battles and then disbanded. Harris and Ingersoll envisioned something different, a permanent unit trained in every aspect of battlefield deception, capable of deploying anywhere along the front within 24 to 48 hours. They sold the concept to General Dwight D. Eisenhower's staff with a simple argument. In modern warfare, where aerial reconnaissance and signals intelligence give commanders unprecedented awareness of enemy positions, the side that controls enemy perception controls the battlefield. The 23rd comprised 4 specialized subunits. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers, 379 men recruited from art schools in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, handled visual deception using inflatable equipment and painted camouflage. The 313 Second Signal Service Company Special, 145 men trained in sonic warfare, projected battlefield sounds using wire recorders and powerful amplifiers developed by Bell Laboratories. The Signal Company Special, 296 radio operators and cryptographers, created fake communications networks that mimicked real units' radio traffic patterns. The 406th Combat Engineers, 168 men, provided security and handled construction. Recruitment had been deliberate and highly selective. The Army sought men whose civilian careers involved creative problem-solving under pressure: artists, architects, advertising designers, set designers from Broadway productions, sound engineers from radio networks. The unit's average IQ tested at 119, one of the highest in the entire United States Army. Among the recruits reporting to Camp Forrest in early 1944 were men who would become cultural icons in peacetime. Ellsworth Kelly, 20 years old, would become one of America's preeminent abstract painters. Bill Blass, 22, would revolutionize American fashion. Arthur Singer would illustrate wildlife guides used by generations of birdwatchers. Art Kane would transform photography with his 1958 A Great Day in Harlem portrait. Bill Blass later described his Ghost Army service with characteristic wit. "I don't think any of us knew what we were getting into. We thought we'd be painting tanks. Nobody mentioned the tanks would be made of rubber and the Germans would be shooting at them." The inflatable M4 Sherman tank arrived packed in canvas bags, each weighing exactly 93 pounds when folded. 4 men could carry one comfortably, 2 could manage it for short distances. Inflated using portable gasoline-powered air compressors that sounded like lawnmowers, each tank took approximately 20 minutes to reach full operational size: 18 feet 4 inches long, 8 feet 3 inches wide, 7 feet 9 inches from ground to turret top. The construction was ingenious, a skeleton of inflatable rubber tubes covered by a skin of rubberized neoprene painted to match actual Sherman tank camouflage patterns. The turret inflated separately and attached to the main body with snaps. From 200 yards or from any altitude an aircraft might photograph from, the result was virtually indistinguishable from 32 tons of American armor. Fred Fox, working at the U.S. Rubber Company facility in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, had designed the inflatables in late 1943 based on specifications provided by Army engineers. The manufacturing challenge was substantial: create something light enough for easy transport and rapid deployment, durable enough to withstand field conditions including rain and moderate wind, yet detailed enough to fool trained German reconnaissance specialists equipped with binoculars, theodolites, and stereoscopic aerial cameras. The design team consulted with Hollywood set designers who understood forced perspective and visual illusion. The production work was distributed across multiple contractors for security. Teresa Ricard, 16 years old, worked the 3 to 7 afternoon shift at the Alice Mill factory in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, after finishing her school day, earning 49 cents an hour to cement the rubber tubes and fold the completed inflatables into their carrying bags. She and her coworkers called them targets, unaware of their actual battlefield purpose, or even that they resembled tanks when inflated. The manufacturing consortium included U.S. Rubber, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and surprisingly, the Scranton Lace Curtain Manufacturing Company in Pennsylvania, whose workers were experienced in handling delicate fabrics and precision assembly. By the time production ended in late 1944, these companies had manufactured hundreds of inflatable items: M4 Sherman tanks, M7 Priest self-propelled artillery, various truck models, 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 155mm howitzers, bulldozers, half-tracks, water tankers, and even L-5 Sentinel reconnaissance aircraft, complete with folding fabric wings. Each piece was tested for durability and visual accuracy before shipment to the 603rd Engineers. The sonic deception system was technologically more complex and represented cutting-edge audio engineering. Under Colonel Hilton Rayleigh, a publicity consultant who had discovered Amelia Earhart in 1928 and managed her rise to fame, the 3132nd partnered with Bell Telephone Laboratories engineers to create the most sophisticated battlefield audio projection system ever devised. The technical challenges were substantial. Sound travels differently across varying terrain, absorbed by forests, reflected by buildings, distorted by wind, bent by temperature gradients in the atmosphere. A recording perfectly audible on flat ground might dissipate to nothing in rolling hills. Temperature inversions could bend sound waves skyward, making ground-level observers hear nothing while aircraft overhead heard everything. Wind could carry sounds miles beyond intended range in one direction while completely muffling them 100 yards upwind. Bell Labs engineers, working at Fort Knox, Kentucky in early 1944, developed solutions through systematic experimentation. Mobile recording studios using 16-inch transcription disc technology captured authentic sounds of real armored and infantry units during training exercises. To avoid Doppler shift, the frequency change that occurs when a sound source moves toward or away from a listener, engineers positioned microphones at the center of measured circles and drove vehicles around them at constant distances and speeds. Multiple recordings were then mixed onto wire recorders, sophisticated devices that recorded audio onto 2 miles of magnetized steel wire per spool, capable of 30 minutes of continuous playback. The playback system was equally impressive from an engineering standpoint. Each sonic half-track, modified M3 half-tracks designated as T6 vehicles, carried multiple speakers weighing 500 pounds each, powerful enough to project sound approximately 15 miles in optimal atmospheric conditions with favorable wind. The amplifiers consumed so much electrical power that each half-track required a dedicated generator trailer. Wind direction, terrain features, humidity, temperature gradients, and atmospheric pressure all affected transmission quality and range, so the 332nd included a mobile weather observation station staffed by soldiers trained in meteorology to calculate exactly how loud to play each recording for maximum effectiveness at minimum risk of detection. The sonic library eventually included more than 20 different programs: armored columns moving at various speeds, infantry divisions marching, supply convoys, bridge construction, artillery batteries being emplaced, and even ambient camp noises, sergeants cursing at troops, mess lines forming, vehicles being maintained. The radio deception component required different skills entirely. German signals intelligence, Funkabwehr, and the Wehrmacht's various intercept services didn't just record message content, they analyzed communication patterns, which units transmitted to which headquarters, how frequently, at what times of day, using which encryption methods. They identified individual telegraph operators by their unique fist, the distinctive rhythm, speed, and pattern each operator produced when sending Morse code, as individually recognizable as a handwritten signature or fingerprint. To convincingly impersonate a real division, Ghost Army radio operators had to study wire recordings of actual operators from the units they would simulate, learning to mimic not just message content and encryption procedures, but the subtle rhythmic signature of individual soldiers' transmission techniques. They memorized call signs, typical message lengths, standard formats, common abbreviations each unit used, and even which operators tended to make which types of transmission errors. This level of detail was critical. German intercept operators could identify specific American radio operators by their telegraphic fist and track them across months and thousands of miles. The signal company Special used both voice radio and continuous wave Morse code telegraphy to create multi-layered deceptions. They would establish a fake division headquarters network, then populate it with fake battalion and company-level traffic, creating a realistic volume and pattern of communications that German direction-finding equipment would track as a genuine formation. The traffic patterns were meticulously authentic, matching the communication styles and encryption methods of actual American divisions. The men themselves became walking elements of each deception. When Ghost Army units moved into new operational areas, soldiers wore the shoulder patches of divisions they were impersonating rather than their actual 23rd Headquarters Special Troops insignia. They painted fake unit designations on vehicles. They established command posts with officers playing the roles of colonels and generals they were simulating. Off-duty, they frequented local bars, cafes, and shops in recently liberated French and Belgian towns, deliberately discussing their fake units within earshot of civilians who might be German agents or might gossip to people who were. This required acting ability, improvisation skills, and constant security awareness. The men had to know enough about the units they were simulating to answer casual questions convincingly, but never reveal information that would expose the deception if the wrong person overheard. They carried fake orders, fake maps, wore fake insignia, and lived fake identities for days or weeks at a time. Colonel Reeder, observing his unusual command take shape at Camp Forest, faced challenges no conventional officer encountered. How do you instill military discipline in artists and intellectuals? How do you train conventional soldiers to think like stage performers and illusionists? The official unit history, compiled after the war, captured the cultural clash. Officers who had once commanded 32-ton tanks felt frustrated and helpless with a battalion of rubber M4s, 93 pounds fully inflated. The adjustment from man of action to man of wile was most difficult. Few combat officers realized at first that one could spend just as much energy, discipline, and courage pretending to fight as actually fighting. By May 1944, the fully trained Ghost Army shipped to England aboard the SS Henry Gibbons, staging near Stratford-upon-Avon before the Normandy invasion. June 20, 1944, Normandy, France. 2 weeks after D-Day, advance elements landed on Utah Beach and received their first operational assignment: simulate activity at a Mulberry Harbor using lights and vehicle movements at night to draw German artillery fire away from the real harbor installations operating several miles east. The deception worked exactly as designed. German gunners shelled empty beach positions and dummy installations, while actual supply operations proceeded virtually unmolested at the genuine Mulberry location. It was a small success, but it validated the entire Ghost Army theory. Then came Operation Brittany, the Ghost Army's first full-scale combined performance. August 21, 1944, the French port city of Brest. The 23rd deployed to assist 8th Corps' siege of the heavily fortified German garrison. Allied command didn't want to commit overwhelming force to a siege while the main advance raced toward Germany. The Ghost Army's mission? Simulate a much larger attacking force, convincing German defenders they faced such strength that reinforcement or breakout was pointless. For the first time, visual, sonic, and radio deception operated in concert as a coordinated system. Corporal Jack Macy from Brooklyn, 20 years old, would later recall Brest as the biggest piece of concentrated action I saw in the entire war, and we weren't even really fighting. The 603rd Engineers positioned more than 50 inflatable tanks within a few hundred yards of actual front lines. Bulldozers cut deep vehicle tracks in the mud leading to each inflatable position. Spent artillery shell casings were scattered around fake gun positions. Camouflage netting was draped over some inflatables but deliberately left incomplete over others, details that made the deception more believable by appearing imperfect. The sonic trucks broadcast continuous sounds of armored movements and supply convoys. Radio operators transmitted hundreds of fake messages using communication patterns matching actual armored divisions. The Germans responded exactly as Allied intelligence hoped. Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft photographed the dummy tank concentrations. German artillery systematically targeted the inflatable positions. Most importantly, German intelligence reports documented a major American armored concentration besieging Brest, causing Wehrmacht command to reinforce the garrison rather than shifting those troops elsewhere. General George S. Patton's Third Army, meanwhile, raced eastward across France with lighter opposition than German strength should have allowed. Some of those missing German units were tied down at Brest, defending against a phantom American force. September 15, 1944. Operation Bettembourg, Luxembourg. Patton's spectacularly rapid advance across France had created dangerous vulnerabilities. His Third Army had outrun its supply lines and stretched its divisions across hundreds of miles of front. Near Luxembourg City, a critical gap opened, more than 20 miles of front line held by minimal screening forces, a weakness German commanders could exploit if they recognized it. The 23rd received emergency orders: simulate a full infantry division defending this sector until real units could redeploy from other positions. The timeline was desperate. They had less than 24 hours to establish a credible defensive position covering 20 miles. They deployed in darkness just south of Luxembourg City, so close to German positions across the narrow front that soldiers could hear enemy vehicles moving, German sentries calling challenges and passwords, the ordinary sounds of an army at war drifting across no man's land. The proximity was terrifying. If the Germans attacked in force and discovered the deception, the Ghost Army would be overrun in minutes. Their 50-caliber machine guns and personal weapons couldn't stop a determined assault by even a single German battalion, let alone the division-strength forces operating in the sector. The sonic crews operated 4 consecutive nights, broadcasting elaborate soundscapes of a massive defensive force digging in, entrenching tools striking rocky Luxembourg soil, trucks delivering barbed wire and ammunition, soldiers cursing the cold, sergeants positioning machine gun crews. Sergeant Victor Dowd, operating one of the sonic half-tracks, later recalled hearing enormous sounds of tracked vehicles racing through the forest, echoing back at us from the German positions. It sounded like an entire armored division was massing for battle, and we'd created all of it from wire recordings and speakers. Radio operators created dense communications traffic mimicking a division headquarters coordinating defensive preparations, battalions reporting positions, artillery batteries registering firing coordinates, supply officers requesting ammunition and rations for thousands of men who didn't exist. Visual deception was limited. The close proximity to German lines made extensive inflatable deployments too risky. But the 603rd positioned equipment where terrain features would make it visible to German observation posts without allowing close inspection. For 8 days, the Ghost Army held this section of line with nothing but illusion. German forces probed repeatedly with patrol-strength reconnaissance elements. Each time, they withdrew after observing what appeared to be well-prepared American defensive positions. Wehrmacht intelligence documented a full American infantry division holding the Luxembourg sector. The real division arrived on September 23rd, moving into actual defensive positions, while the Ghost Army quietly withdrew, their mission accomplished without firing a shot. Colonel Clifford Simonson, the Ghost Army's operations officer, later called Bettembourg our first operation that was executed fully professionally and correctly from start to finish. It was also the first time we truly understood that we could die doing this, that our lives depended entirely on the Germans never figuring out what we really were. The stakes had become viscerally clear. Each sonic half-track was wired with thermite demolition charges. If German forces broke through, operators had standing orders: Pull the detonation lever and let the incendiary charges melt the classified equipment into slag rather than allow its capture. No one pulled those levers at Bettenberg. The deception held perfectly. The pattern repeated across the European theater through autumn and winter 1944. During Patton's assault on Metz in late September, the Ghost Army filled a gap along the Moselle River. Near the Hurtgen Forest in November, they created phantom forces that convinced German planners the Americans were stronger in certain sectors than reality supported. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, their radio deception operations drew German attention away from the relief effort heading to surrounded Bastogne. Each operation followed similar rhythms: deploy rapidly, establish elaborate theatrical production under field conditions, perform convincingly while German artillery tried to destroy them, then vanish to the next assignment. The deceptions worked because they operated at multiple levels simultaneously. Aerial reconnaissance photographed tank concentrations, visual confirmation. Radio intercept services tracked division headquarters communications, electronic confirmation. Sound ranging equipment detected armored movements, acoustic confirmation. Each layer validated the others, creating a comprehensive illusion resistant to skeptical analysis. Captured Wehrmacht documents showed German intelligence tracking the Ghost Army's phantom divisions with complete confidence, repositioning real combat units to counter American forces that existed only as 93 pounds of pressurized rubber, carefully modulated loudspeaker broadcasts, and meticulously crafted radio transmissions. March 18, 1945, 1800 hours, Viersen, Germany. Operation Viersen began as two real American infantry divisions, the 30th Old Hickory Division and the 79th Infantry Division, quietly withdrew from 13th Corps defensive positions north of Dusseldorf and moved under cover of darkness to 16th Corps staging areas near Wessel, 25 miles north. The Ninth Army, commanded by General William Hood Simpson, planned to cross the Rhine River at Wessel on March 23, supported by British forces from Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group, attacking immediately north. The Rhine crossing, Operation Flashpoint for the American component, Operation Plunder for the British, would be the largest amphibious assault since D-Day, involving more than 1 million Allied soldiers. But the crossing points would be catastrophically vulnerable if German defenders concentrated artillery and armored reserves at the actual attack locations. The Ghost Army received a mission of unprecedented scope: impersonate those two departing divisions in their old 13th Corps positions, convincing German intelligence they remained in place and planned to cross the Rhine near Krefeld, 10 miles south of the actual Ninth Army attack. The deception had to be absolutely convincing and had to hold for 6 days, long enough for the real divisions to complete their secret redeployment, make their preparations, cross the Rhine, and establish bridgeheads before German command could react. The scale was staggering. The 23rd would simulate approximately 40,000 combat troops, nearly 40 times their actual strength of 1,100 men, using every deception technique they had developed and refined across 20 previous operations spanning 10 months. This would be the Ghost Army's masterpiece, or their catastrophic failure. There was no middle ground. Ghost Army convoys began moving into 13th Corps positions east and west of Viersen, following routes the real 30th and 79th Divisions had used, maintaining their radio call signs and communication patterns to avoid any discontinuity that German intercept operators might notice. More than 600 inflatable vehicles arrived packed in canvas bags loaded on trucks, Sherman tanks, M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, trucks in multiple models, half-tracks, bulldozers, artillery prime movers, and command vehicles. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers worked through darkness in 12-hour shifts, inflating equipment and positioning it in realistic assembly areas that German aerial reconnaissance would photograph at dawn. They created mock tank parks with proper spacing between vehicles matching actual armored unit procedures, established fake artillery batteries with appropriate fields of fire, positioned supply dumps with correct layouts, even inflated dummy L-5 reconnaissance aircraft at a fake airstrip. Bulldozers cut vehicle tracks, artillery shell casings were scattered, oil stains were created with used motor oil, crushed vegetation marked where heavy equipment had supposedly maneuvered. Every detail mattered. German photo interpreters were trained to spot deceptions by looking for exactly these kinds of inconsistencies: pristine ground around tanks that supposedly just arrived, absence of normal debris around artillery positions, equipment positioned in ways that violated tactical doctrine. Aerial photographs taken by U.S. reconnaissance flights the next morning, March 19, showed remarkably authentic-looking divisional layouts with approximately correct equipment densities, realistic tactical positioning, and proper organizational structure. The photos would have fooled American intelligence specialists. They certainly fooled the Germans. The sonic crews began operations immediately. Starting at 19:30 on March 18, the first broadcasts began, sounds of heavy trucks rolling into the area suggesting major troop movements and equipment deliveries. During daylight hours, March 19, they played construction sounds, hammering, sawing, power equipment, shouted instructions, simulating the assembly of pontoon bridging units preparing for a river crossing. The sounds carried approximately 15 miles to German positions across the Rhine under favorable atmospheric conditions that night. Engineers from the 87th Armored Field Artillery Battalion and 738th Tank Battalion, attached to the Ghost Army for Operation Viersen, added physical credibility by actually moving some real equipment into the deception area, creating a mixture of genuine and fake forces that made the overall picture more convincing. Radio operators established dense communications networks broadcasting continuous traffic using the 30th and 79th Division's authentic call signs, encryption methods, and transmission styles. They created message patterns suggesting two division headquarters coordinating defensive operations, preparing crossing sites, stockpiling assault boats and bridging equipment, planning offensive operations, exactly what divisions preparing for a river assault would transmit. Soldiers throughout the deception area wore 30th and 79th Division shoulder patches. Officers visited local German towns recently captured, making their presence obvious, letting civilians see the division insignia, discussing their units in cafes where German intelligence agents might overhear. The Germans responded with immediate, heavy artillery fire. Beginning March 19 and continuing throughout the operation, German batteries pounded the Ghost Army positions with everything from 88mm guns to 150mm howitzers. Shells destroyed numerous inflatable tanks and vehicles. The 603rd Engineers worked frantically between barrages, repairing damaged inflatables, re-inflating punctured equipment, replacing destroyed pieces, maintaining the visual deception even as explosions walked across their positions. It was exhausting, terrifying work performed under fire by men whose heaviest weapons were .5 caliber machine guns. March 20, 21, 22, the deception continued. Sonic broadcasts every night, radio traffic around the clock, visual displays maintained despite artillery damage. The Ghost Army performed for 6 straight days while German observers watched, German artillery tried to destroy them, and German intelligence officers analyzed every piece of information they could gather. The strain on the men was enormous, sleeping in shifts, constantly aware that German shells could obliterate them at any moment, knowing that if the deception failed, the actual Rhine crossing 10 miles north could turn into a slaughter. The responsibility was crushing. Thousands of American lives depended on 1,100 artists and sound engineers maintaining a convincing lie under combat conditions. But the deception held. German intelligence tracked the 30th and 79th Divisions in exactly the positions where the Ghost Army was performing. Wehrmacht's situation maps showed American forces preparing to cross at Krefeld. German commanders positioned defensive units accordingly: real panzer divisions, real artillery battalions, real infantry, opposite the Ghost Army's inflatable tanks and loudspeakers. March 23, 1945, 2100 hours, 10 miles north at Wessel, the real crossing began. The 30th and 79th Divisions, the actual combat formations with real tanks, real artillery, real soldiers, launched amphibious assaults across the Rhine using LVT amphibious tractors and assault boats. They encountered disorganized, lighter resistance than intelligence estimates had predicted. German defensive units that should have been concentrated at Wesel were instead positioned south at Krefeld, preparing to defend against the phantom American divisions the Ghost Army had created. The 30th Division's G2 intelligence officer, Captain John M. Jack Wilson, later reported that the American attack came as a complete surprise to the enemy with a consequent saving of American lives that cannot be measured. Ninth Army intelligence staff confirmed through captured documents and prisoner interrogations that German command had expected the main Allied crossing effort to occur north of Wesel with a secondary attack opposite Krefeld, exactly where the Ghost Army was performing their deception. The crossing succeeded with casualties far lower than pre-operation estimates. American forces established bridgeheads, engineers constructed pontoon bridges, armor crossed and fanned out into German territory. The Rhine, Germany's last major defensive barrier, had been breached. General William Simpson sent official commendations. Field Marshal Montgomery's headquarters noted the successful deception in after-action reports. Operation Viersen had succeeded beyond anyone's most optimistic predictions. March 24, the morning after the crossing, the Ghost Army began deflating their equipment, loading rubber tanks back into canvas bags, shutting down sonic trucks, terminating radio transmissions, preparing to move to their next assignment. They'd held the deception for 6 days. They'd fooled the Wehrmacht completely, and they'd contributed to saving potentially thousands of American lives by drawing German defenders away from the actual crossing points. Lieutenant Colonel Merrick H. Truly's after-action report called Operation Viersen fortunately the best of all Ghost Army operations. The unit's official history would describe it as their masterpiece, the perfect integration of visual, sonic, and radio deception executed at maximum scale under combat conditions. The irony was profound. Germany had built the most technically sophisticated military machine in history: advanced tanks, jet aircraft, V-2 ballistic missiles, radar systems. Yet here at the Rhine, they had been systematically deceived by American college students wielding rubber balloons and recorded sound effects. The human cost of Ghost Army operations was proportionately smaller than conventional combat units, but that statistical reality didn't reduce the fear or psychological burden carried by the 1,100 men who executed these deceptions under fire. Armed with only .50 caliber machine guns for self-defense, the Ghost Army faced unique combat stress. Unlike conventional soldiers who could shoot back, Ghost Army personnel could only maintain their deception, trusting that rubber tanks and recorded sounds would continue fooling an enemy actively trying to kill them. 3 Ghost Army soldiers were killed in action, and approximately 30 were wounded seriously enough to require medical evacuation. Each casualty represented a man who had volunteered for special technical duty and found himself under artillery fire or mortar bombardment. Private Bernard Bluestein, who survived the war and lived past age 100, recalled decades later, "If I had known before joining that we'd be that close to actual combat, literally under German guns, I probably would have made a different decision." The psychological toll was distinct from conventional combat, but no less real. When German artillery bracketed a sonic half-track, the operators kept the speakers broadcasting, knowing that stopping would break the deception. When shells burst among inflatable tanks, engineers stayed exposed to repair damaged pieces. The awareness of responsibility compounded the stress. These weren't just individual soldiers trying to survive, they were components of complex deceptions on which thousands of other American lives depended. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. Beyond physical casualties, there was the constant isolation of secrecy. Ghost Army soldiers couldn't discuss their missions with soldiers from other units. When rotating to rear areas for rest, they had to maintain false identities. Some carried this burden for decades after the war ended. The unit remained classified top secret until 1996, 51 years after victory in Europe. Many Ghost Army veterans died without ever telling their families what they'd actually done. Those who tried were sometimes accused of making up ridiculous stories about inflatable tanks and rubber armies. Yet the casualty rate remained remarkably low considering their proximity to combat and their vulnerability. This wasn't luck, it was the fundamental success of their deceptions. The Germans never discovered what the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops actually was. Every artillery barrage that destroyed rubber tanks instead of steel, every German division repositioned to counter phantom threats, represented Allied lives saved. The final accounting would show that while 3 Ghost Army soldiers died and approximately 30 were wounded across 20-plus operations spanning 11 months, the deceptions they maintained saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives. The exchange ratio was extraordinary. A small unit of creative specialists, lightly armed and constantly exposed, protecting tens of thousands of combat soldiers through nothing but imagination, technical skill, and flawless performance under fire. After Operation Viersen, the Ghost Army continued operating until May 8, 1945, VE Day, executing smaller deceptions as Allied armies advanced into Germany. They returned to the United States in July 1945 and were officially deactivated on September 15, 1945. The men dispersed to civilian lives, sworn to secrecy, forbidden from discussing their service. Some became famous in their fields, Bill Blass revolutionizing American fashion, Ellsworth Kelly transforming abstract art, Art Kane redefining photography. Others returned to quieter lives, carrying memories of combat they couldn't share. March 24, 1945, the morning after the Rhine crossing. Across the river at Wesel, smoke still rose from German positions that had been too lightly defended to stop the Ninth Army's assault. 10 miles south, near Krefeld, the Ghost Army began packing their equipment. The deception had worked flawlessly. Wehrmacht forces had positioned divisions to defend against attacks that never came. American soldiers who might have died assaulting heavily fortified positions instead advanced against disorganized resistance. German commanders had made deployment decisions based on completely false information the Ghost Army had carefully crafted and meticulously maintained. What made this possible wasn't just equipment, though the inflatable tanks and sonic trucks represented remarkable engineering achievements. It was the recognition that modern warfare occurred as much in enemy perception as on physical ground. The Ghost Army fought in the space between reality and belief, weaponizing the gap between what Germans thought they observed and what actually existed. After the war, Ghost Army veterans were sworn to absolute secrecy. Operational security demanded silence. When records were finally declassified in 1996 after 51 years, a different story emerged, not just of creative soldiers and inflatable tanks, but of a fundamental shift in how wars could be fought and won. The Congressional Gold Medal presented March 21, 2024 to 3 surviving Ghost Army veterans, Bernard Bluestein, John Christman, and Seymour Nussenbaum, all aged 99 or older, recognized not just their personal service, but the revolutionary concept they represented. They had waged war with imagination instead of firepower, proving that sometimes the most devastating weapon is one the enemy never sees because it doesn't physically exist. The Ghost Army understood something that remains relevant in an age of information warfare and cyber operations. The greatest military victory isn't always defeating enemy forces through superior firepower. Sometimes it's making enemies defeat themselves by manipulating their understanding of reality, causing them to commit resources against phantom threats while actual dangers approach unnoticed. Their legacy endures wherever warfare extends beyond physical destruction into the realm of belief and perception. The tools have changed dramatically. Digital deception has replaced rubber tanks. Cyber operations substitute for radio spoofing. Sophisticated electronic warfare systems do what sonic trucks once did. But the underlying principle remains identical. Make the enemy believe a carefully constructed falsehood, and you can defeat them without firing a shot. The 3 Ghost Army soldiers who died in action, the 30 who were wounded, and the 1,100 who served with distinction earned their place in military history not through conventional heroism, but through a different kind of courage. The courage to fight with nothing but creativity, to trust that illusion could defeat reality, to perform their roles perfectly under fire, even when survival depended entirely on enemies never discovering the truth. They succeeded completely. The Germans never knew, and thousands of American soldiers came home from the war because of it.